and welcome to Storytime with Uncle Gravy and Purdy, who may or may not behave, and may or may not be pesty, and also may or may not be just completely loving and daft and soppy, but we'll see, shall we? So Hollie and Jake had heard noises, and they'd seen things that they weren't expecting to see. And after a night of dreaming about these things, while Ash was exploring on the other side of the fence, the morning came along, sooner than they thought. The noises coming from the other side of the fence were being made by Hollie and Jake, who were now awake, and planning what to say to each of their parents when they got asked about how the camp-out had been. They had both felt the brilliant feeling when you wake up in a tent outside, and the day is starting to uncurl, and movement and sound begins to happen all around you. Hollie stretched, and her hand brushed the notebook that was still open on the pages where she had recorded various animals' noises and sightings. The feel of the paper on her hand reminded her quickly of the animal, the thing, that she hadn't written down in the book, and her mind began to race. Jake was having similar thoughts, but was also running over the image in his mind again and again. As is often the case, when you see or feel things at night, they just feel absolutely real and clear, but the following morning can make you doubt what you may have seen or thought, especially if they are things that just don't seem to fit any kind of logic or sense. Hollie was the first one to think out loud. She was practical at first, but couldn't ignore what had happened. So, what shall we tell our mums and dads, Jake? We saw what we hoped to see and heard lots of stuff too, so we've got the data to compare. For when we've made the hole through the other garden, I mean. But what do we say about the thing? I honestly don't know, Hollie, said Jake slowly. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, we're talking about something very small indeed, that we both think we saw in the torchlight. But maybe it was just a shrew, a baby one. They can look furry and fluffy. Hollie was clear about what was in her mind. Jake, we know it was small, but we know what we saw. It was standing. Yes, on very tiny feet, and yes, we only saw it for a couple of seconds, but the hoglet saw it too, and it was scared off by it. That means it must have done something. It must be able to think and react and plan, so it must be an intelligent animal. I'm going to tell Mum and Dad about everything we saw. They know loads of weird stuff about lots of things, and I need to know what we saw last night. Hollie sounded really excited, and her sleep, in between seeing whatever... Sorry, Bird is not helping. In between seeing whatever they had seen, had not made her doubt her memories of the night before at all. Well, you'll have your chance soon enough, because your dad's cutting the hole into the fence this morning after breakfast, isn't he? Come on, let's go in. Jake sounded tired and a little bit grumpy. He didn't want to be teased or look silly, and he wasn't as keen as Hollie to share the story straight away. He also knew, though, that it would be impossible for it not to be mentioned, and that whatever happened next, it wouldn't be in his control. Bernie and Chris were warm and cosy inside the shell. It was the kind that you collect on holiday sometimes, when you're at the beach and paddling in the clear, dribbly waves near the shore, watching your toes disappear into the sand. It had actually been a nice home for a hermit crab a long time ago, and was very pretty, so Hollie had collected it, along with many other shells, and put them in a bag. When they were packing to come home from holiday, she had only been allowed to bring one shell home, and this one had been her choice. At some point it had got used in a sandpit in the garden, but then it found its way into the dark parts of the garden after the sandpit had been given away to the children over the road. The shell was further away from the dividing fence between the gardens, which was a good job, because it already sounded like it was going to be another busy day, with the giants making lots of noise already. As they started to wake from their nap, Bernie and Chris began to hear all kinds of bother coming from over the fence, and it instantly reminded them of how awful the previous night had been, and that they needed to know where Ash was as quickly as possible. In Jake's garden, Holly's mum was taking tent pegs out of the ground and collecting them carefully. And next, she was folding up the outer shell of the tent until all that was left was the frame and the ground sheet on the lawn. It didn't take long to put the tent poles apart, wrap them in the ground sheet, and store everything away together neatly in the old canvas cover, which tore a little as the bundle went in. Time to go away again, for now, she thought, and smiled again at the idea of packing away new memories into the old bag, which had already held so many old ones. When she got back, Holly and her dad were waiting for her with smiles on their faces. They were sitting at the kitchen table, which had a plate of freshly made pancakes in the middle of it. There were little bowls with lemon halves, blueberries and bananas in them, and the nutty chocolate spread was there too in its chunky jar. This was a regular Saturday morning treat, as Holly's dad loved making pancakes, almost as much as they all enjoyed eating them. As they tucked into their treaty breakfast, Holly's dad sipped his mug of tea, placed it on the table and said, "So then, how did it all go last night? We looked out the window very late and saw your torches still wafting around, so what did you get to record in your lovely new notebooks?" Holly decided to start off slowly and build up courage, so replied casually, "Well, we heard tawny owls and foxes and saw lots of slugs and snails oozing past, and there were bats zigzagging around too for a few minutes, just after you had turned off the garden light." That sounds like a pretty good collection," said Holly's mum. "But what about the main event? What about the mysterious creatures that you only see at night?" Her eyes went wide as she spoke, and Holly suddenly wondered if she actually knew that there was something incredible and magical out there. "Huh?" was all she could manage in reply, and her mum laughed straight away and said, "Hedgehogs! Did you see any hedgehogs?" Holly felt a bit crushed. She had just got the tiny hope that she wouldn't have to describe what she had seen. Of course, the original idea of the camp-out had been to see if there was a hedgehog or any activity in Jake's garden, so why wouldn't her mum ask about hedgehogs? What she had seen, or felt sure she had seen, would not be easy to slip into this conversation, so she just went along with it. "Oh, yes, we did. In fact, we saw a mother and 3 tiny hoglets. It was quite cool." Holly's dad was just finishing a particularly yummy banana, blueberry and maple syrup pancake while this chat was happening, but was now looking at Holly with a questioning look on his face. "And was that it? From this side of the table you sound a little unimpressed. Is there anything else that went on, or that you saw? I get the feeling we aren't getting the full picture." Holly looked at her dad. He was a grown-up, so could be really annoying, but sometimes he just noticed things or guessed things, and he wasn't afraid to ask questions to try and find out the whole story. She was suddenly unsure what to say now. She knew that all she actually wanted to do was blurt everything out and try to explain what she and Jake had seen, but also now felt really nervous of her parents' reaction. She knew how astonished she had felt when their torch shone on whatever it was, and also knew that her parents would be pretty amazed too. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd just laugh and tell her not to be so silly. Either way, Holly felt that not sharing what she had seen would be the wrong thing to do, so she took a deep breath, looked at each other, and looked at each of her parents and said, "Actually, there was something else we saw. I saw it. I know I did, but my brain tells me I couldn't have." There was a pause, and then her mum said, "Go on, we're listening." Holly now just felt like she had set herself up for a very awkward moment. Her mum was looking at her like she did sometimes when she was in trouble for not clearing up or dropping biscuit crumbs on the carpet. Her dad looked like he was willing her to say the truth, however weird it was. Holly started to speak, but was surprised when she heard herself say, "I think I saw a shooting star, or a meteorite, or something. Jake said he didn't see it, but I'm sure I did. I just wasn't expecting to see anything like that. That's all." Holly's mind had made the decision for her. Her face was burning, and she felt embarrassed and annoyed that she hadn't told the truth, or whatever the truth was that she thought she had seen. It was as though her mind had decided to move her thoughts as far away from the ground as possible and up into the sky. far, far away from focusing on the incredible creature she knew had caught her eye. Said Holly's dad, rubbing his chin slightly and noticing how red Holly's face had become. Well, there aren't any meteor showers due for a while yet, but there is always rubbish and small bits of rock entering the atmosphere. Never reaches the ground because it vaporises and burns up, high above where we are. That's what a shooting star really is. I expect that's what you saw. It only lasts a couple of seconds, so I'm not surprised Jake didn't see it. Holly nodded, trying to look interested, even though her tummy was tying itself in knots. Phew, said Holly's mum, smiling. The way you were talking, I was beginning to think you'd seen a vampire bat or a fairy at the bottom of the garden. She chuckled and made bat wings with her arms, but Holly's mind just whirled again. Why did she mention fairies at the bottom of the garden? Why did she choose to say that? Did she know something? And if she did, was she just teasing her? Holly now felt cross at her mum for being silly and felt like she was now the only one who could hold his secret and still believe in it. She also felt let down by Jake and his refusal to properly share what they had seen. Holly now needed just to be somewhere else, fast. She left the table with her, "It doesn't matter," and headed straight for her room. Holly's parents watched her leave, looked at each other, and did the classic thing that parents do when faced with a young person who is not acting as normally and predictably as they would expect. They decided she was tired. Being up in the early hours, at her age, was bound to make her grumpy, and she'd be more like herself after a sleep, or a stretch out on the big beanbag in her bedroom. And tomorrow, we'll find out what truly happens when people start to discuss what has been seen in the garden.